Your mother tongue? Wait.
You're right, you do it now.
What's your mother tongue language? Now that's a question. Nothing is more indicative of your cultural identity, background, and relationships than, well, you know, your mother tongue language. Wow, I'm very dark, you can't see me. But in an increasingly intercultural and multicultural world, that question is getting harder and harder to answer. It's a very intimate sounding term, you know? Your mother tongue. What does that even mean? No one knows! Linguists have no consensus on how to define this abstract linguistic concept, as it depends on the environment and context in which it's discussed in. So if we're talking about fluency, native language would be a better term. If we're talking about comfort, maybe primary language. There are a bunch of synonyms that you could use. Essentially, I'm focusing on mother tongue because it's a problematic term. Like me. Messiness, disagreement, confusion. That's what makes things interesting. Let's put definitions into two camps, exogenous and endogenous, or top-down and bottom-up. Let's talk about bottom-up first. Linguist Ying Tang combined several ideas from other prominent linguists to create her bottom-up definition of a mother tongue language. It includes four main criteria: expertise, inheritance, function, and identification. Expertise and identification is pretty self-explanatory. However, Ying Tang's interpretation of inheritance and function is particularly flexible with the contexts in which a speaker can choose to acquire or utilize a language. The repertoire of languages in which someone is exposed to when inheriting a language, much less a mother tongue, is not monolithic to culture, tradition, or community. It can be any of those, or none of them. Basically, a speaker has the freedom to choose where they learn or inherit a language from. On top of that, although there are many scenarios in which a speaker cannot choose a language of discourse, the language of leisure, internal dialogue, and the intimate relationships are something that people choose by personal choice, and that affects how much they identify with language. These become even more complicated when you introduce multiculturalism, the mesh of civic and ethnic identities, and the balance of cross-cultural kids. What's your name and what's your ethnic background?
My name is Lee Long Hey Brandon. My mom's from Malaysia and my dad's from Hong Kong.
I am Robert. I grew up in Hong Kong. I was born and raised here, and I am half white American, half Chinese / Chinese Malaysian.
How would you define a mother tongue language, like for real?
It would be proficiency, but I would say that mother tongue would just be what language you are most comfortable with, what you speak at home with your family.
I feel like it's the first language that you speak with, literally to your mother, I guess, to like your parents. And it's just the first language that you get to actually communicate in.
Then what's your mother tongue language? And like, why do you think so?
I would say it's Cantonese for sure, because my mom and dad spoke to me in Cantonese. Wait, but at the same time, I feel like the first words I spoke was in English.
I would have to say English, just because that's what I grew up speaking. That's what I'm most comfortable speaking. My mom tried to get us to speak Cantonese in the house, but when I was a young kid, it just didn't really work out. I wasn't immersed in the language enough. No, the rest of my brothers weren't either.
Can you gain one?
Can you gain a mother tongue language?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think the mother language is like, your mother tongue is the one that you are literally like born with, and like the one that you first speak.
God, I don't know. That's a tough question. It's a tough question.
Like, can it change?
I think the word mother, in my mind at least, implies that it is something that's generational, something that's passed down, something that's in your family. So maybe not. I'd say if you learn a language later in life, even if it's what you speak most of the time, I don't think I would consider it a mother tongue. It would just be what you speak. I think mother tongue would have to be something that is like something you grew up with, I would say.
Do you think people can have two mother tongues?
I'm asking the questions, bro. I mean, do you think that people can have like multiple mother tongue languages? Let's say like people of multi-ethnic background.
I mean, definitely, right? For example, if like your dad's from like France, for example, and your mom's from China, and then your mom speaks to you in Chinese, whereas your dad speaks to you in French, like, I feel like definitely people can have more than one mother tongue language.
I think you definitely can. You definitely can. I just don't, sadly. And I'm trying to work on that. Most comfortable doesn't have to be singular most.
Right. Like, you can't really, it's not mutually exclusive in a lot of ways.
I think if I got my Cantonese to a point where I was more fluent in it, I would say that it would be my second mother tongue. It's just that at this moment in time, I feel like I'm not comfortable saying that if I'm not fluent enough.
I mean, if you can barely speak a word of Cantonese, can you really call it your mother tongue language? Yeah, I think it still constitutes as a mother tongue language because it's like the first language you learn how to speak.
What if like one parent doesn't speak to them in the language and from the culture that they're from? Let's say in that like scenario, let's say you had the French dad, Chinese mom doesn't speak any form of Chinese to the kid, only speak French. Is Chinese still a mother tongue language for them?
I don't think so. Because if the kid starts off speaking French, right? I feel like the mother tongue language is just the language that you first speak.
I guess especially, let's say for us, as like cross-culture kids. Because you have a parent that comes from a culture in which English is its first language, right? Let's say for me, for instance, my dad being from Hong Kong, my mom from Malaysia. They're both from cultures in which English isn't necessarily the primary language, yet it's mine. Do you think I can classify English as a mother tongue language for me in that case? Although, because English is a tertiary, secondary language.
That's an interesting question. I don't know. That's a weird edge case because it's like the lingua franca, where it's like it is what is common between both your parents being both their second languages. So then it is your first because that's what is. I don't know.
There's overlap.
Yeah.
What would you think my mother tongue language is? Because we do have a very similar ethnic background.
I mean, did your mom speak to you in English when you were younger?
Yes.
Probably English then. And I say that because you don't speak a lot in Chinese nowadays, right? And I feel like even when you were younger, you were always like English vibe.
Do you think a mother tongue language is something you can choose then, if that's the case?
No.
No.
It's like the first language that you speak. Like the first language that you speak, Mom, I want milk.
I mean, in that case, do you think it's a very I guess it's more of like a top-down assigned thing rather than a bottom-up thing? Perfect transition point. Let's pivot to top-down definitions of mother tongue languages, i.e. definitions that involve factors beyond the agency or identity development of the speaker. Top-down definitions of mother tongue languages are often used by governments who assign the criteria of what a mother tongue language is for their citizens. Sometimes it's tied to race, ethnicity, or other traits. Case in point, Singapore. Pinboard's back. Here's a quick oversimplification, and mind you, extreme oversimplification of what mother tongue languages, or MTLs, are in Singapore. Amongst other socioeconomic reasons and colonialism, of course there's colonialism involved, and consideration of ethnic tensions, Singapore's government chose English as a neutral lingua franca and business language. But Singapore's leaders didn't want Singaporeans to lose touch of their ethno-cultural heritage and wanted to prevent excessive westernization. So, they designated 3 mother tongue languages to each of the 3 dominant ethnicities in the country, serving as what founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew would later identify as cultural ballasts. Gosh, your lining on this is actually terrible. Hopefully I correct this in post. But even with that said, English is the #1 spoken language in the country, with over 80% of people over the age of 15 proficient in the language. About 48% of Singaporean households use English as their main mode of language, with a number estimated to go up significantly into the near future. In fact, a majority of respondents by a study from Ying and Tom said that English and its colloquial Creole, Singlish, was the language that best represented Singapore as a nation. Then based on these metrics and policies, what is a mother tongue language to Singaporeans?
So, my name is Darryl Lee. I'm ethnically Chinese. My father is Hokkien, my mother's Cantonese, and we are Singaporean now, but in the recent past, we were Malaysian, yeah.
Okay, my name's Isaac. I'm Chinese, not from the mainland, I'm Singaporean. Senator, I am Singaporean.
First question, what is your mother tongue language and why?
Mother tongue language is Chinese.
That's the language of my family. That's my sort of like heritage language, as opposed to like my first language, which is English, because I grew up speaking there, and it's my principal working language.
It's different to how I understand it now, but back then it's like a second language almost, which is weird because the mother tongue should be your main one, right? Like that's your mother's tongue. But I never speak Chinese at home, so I would define mother tongue as like the language you're most comfortable with speaking.
What would you say your mother tongue, based on your own definition?
Based on my definition,
yeah.
I would be most comfortable speaking English. But, I mean, ethnically, I'm Chinese, I should be speaking Mandarin, but that's not the case, yeah.
I think in English, right? I think a huge part is what language you articulate and interpret the world with.
Yeah, what do you choose to...
Yeah, and I choose to interpret it with English. Sometimes certain concepts can only be captured in Chinese or German, and when that's the case, I interpret it in those, but for the most part, it's English. That goes down to identity, right? And so, if you ask me what I am as a person, who I am as a person, I'll tell you I'm Singaporean first, and I'm Chinese second. And if you press me on what dialect group I am, I'll tell you I'm Hokkien or Cantonese.
If you had to choose any Chinese dialect, would you choose Mandarin as your mother tongue?
Yeah, probably.
Probably. Even in spite of your parents being from other dialect groups, you would probably still choose Mandarin.
Yeah.
Yes, because I can't speak Hokkien or Cantonese.
Right.
And my family is Chinese. It's not quite the 60s anymore where your first identity is your dialect group and then your ethnic group, the Chinese, and then finally your national identity. For me, it's very much the other way around. And I would have to say, from a post-structuralist point of view as a historian, I would sort of interpret it as being a product of, how nation building is shaped the way I see myself.
In that case, then what do you think your mum and your dad would say if you asked them what is their mother tongue language?
Gosh. I think my dad would say it's Chinese because he was Chinese educated.
Like Chinese as in Mandarin Chinese?
Mandarin Chinese, because he was steeped in that sort of classical Chinese or overseas Chinese education.
What about your mom?
My mom, I would say she'd probably say Cantonese or Chinese. I'm not very sure. Because she was English educated.
I think it's different because like it's a generational thing, right? Like I think with my grandparents and their parents, they're most likely speaking like Canto, or for my mom it'll be like Teochew or Hokkien. Carried on to my dad. I would never.
Yeah.
And even my mom. Like my mom had to learn Canto to speak to my dad's parents. But I mean, it just never trickled down to me.
We're all just sort of the product of how we grew up and where we grew up. And
I think I'm too distant from that reality. Like my parents are first generation Singaporeans, so perhaps that has something to do with it.
Right.
And then I would be second gen, which means Mandarin is more likely to be my mother tongue, just because of what I've learned in school and shit.
Do you think you can have multiple mother tongue languages or no?
I think you can. It may not be linguistically accurate, it may not be definitionally accurate, but at least what I think the word mother tongue denotes, right, is that it's a language inherited from your family based on ethnicity and culture. And if that should be the case, then I don't see why not a person who is sort of mixed dialect heritage, can have multiple mother tongues.
You have a lot of parents where they're like half, quarter, or even like my parents are like some like Canto or Hokkien. If you count those as mother tongue languages, as dialects as mother tongue languages, then I think you can have multiple, yeah, for sure.
I'm fairly certain, because of the way I was brought up and how entrenched English is to me, that my children may, if I have children, may come to think of English as their mother tongue. I don't see why not someone whose family grew up speaking English and Chinese could not form a rational identity or coherent identity around the fact that their mother tongue is both English and Chinese.
Having English as a mother tongue language is a bit of a stretch in Singapore.
Right.
I think that's very hard to say. It's not something we even recognize. Honestly, I don't think we recognize that. English has become a shared language in Singapore.
Yep.
It's never one where I was born and I'm already speaking English, because all our parents, if anything, some of them do not speak English. That's why you get the mother tongue to actually converse with them. In general, I think it's for the better. Yeah, if you really tie through. In the context of Singapore, because like when you look at that, we're very nationalistic in the sense that we promote that national identity as Singaporean first. And that's why we have this dissociation with what our ethnic group is. Like we don't really have ties. And I think having a mother tongue language associated to your race, CMIO, broadly speaking, would help you be closer to your roots in that sense. Because you find often in this case where a lot of people like me don't have a second language or a mother tongue language. And then I guess that's the way the government is trying to do it. And this is also speaking towards myself. Like I should be tied down to what my roots are. I think that's very important so that you don't lose your own cultural identity.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it simplified it a great deal. You can tell what's your mother tongue, at least for the most part. I do acknowledge there are edge cases where people don't associate with it, or where people speak languages at home that aren't taught in school. But for the most part, especially for the majority experience, because I can only speak for the majority experience as a Chinese person, that me learning Chinese in school has helped. It allows for a very straightforward assertion of the fact that my mother tongue is Chinese and I am Chinese. It seems at this moment the government is encouraging people to learn their dialects as well, as part of broader measures to help assemble or help fortify the Singaporean Chinese identity. I do acknowledge that there are those people who do speak Hokkien and Cantonese at home as their first language. I can't speak for them, I just can speak for myself and people like me who don't speak Cantonese, who don't speak Hokkien, at least not very well. Then yeah, I think we likely just see ourselves more as Chinese. I'm adding a lot of caveats, but yeah.
No. But I think that's the point. You have to have caveats. There are always caveats, edge cases. There are always nuances to it. Okay, so overall, what are you gonna make out of the last 15 minutes of your life watching this video? Let's go back to that main question. What is a mother tongue language? To take an old adage from the great Vin Diesel, it's all about family.
I would say a mother tongue is the language you would associate most with your family. Or I guess a broader community in general, even.
Not only should you get the chance to choose, right, but it's also kind of the language that you're born with. feel like it depends on how you interpret it.
Yeah, because you have what you inherit, but you choose whether you inherit or not. It's not quite like it's mimetic, not genetic.
It's not exclusively exogenous or endogenous. It can
It's
a mix.
it's a mix of both. Yeah, there's agency and there's structure.
Do you want me to say that in a self-contained sentence?
Nah, this is good enough. The entire reason why I made this video is because a mother tongue language is an understanding of where you feel like you belong. And sometimes I don't know where I feel like I belong. A lot of people in this generation grew up with different cultural influences far and wide from a very, very young age. And our understandings of how ethnic and civic cultures measure one another in terms of understanding our identity, it's messy at its neatest. It was easy for me to get caught up in definitions and asking other people how valid they felt those definitions were for their stories. But very rarely did I ask the same questions for myself. At the end of the day, I wasn't going to get an answer of who I was by just simply asking other people. And you're not going to get the same answer by just watching this video. Because our realities of what is home is only something that we can validate for ourselves. So, what's my mother tongue language? I don't know. But perhaps time may tell. Which is cliche to say, but it's true. Because for many of us, our sense of home gets stronger the longer we're away from it. There's not much left on the tape, but do you have anything else you would want to add to the video?
Hi, Mom.
How old are you this year?
24.
Like and subscribe, bro. Like and subscribe.
That's a disgusting way to end the video. That's it?
Words are so hard, man. What the hell?
Yeah.
See, I don't have a mother tongue language. I can barely speak English. That's 15 minutes.
Yeah, I know, right? Time flies when you're
Oh my
talking.
God, how did I say nothing for 15 minutes?